Whispers on Steel, Book 1 of the Railway Inheritance, written by Melody Gilly. Chapter 12. Morrison replaced the telephone receiver with deliberate care, allowing no outward sign of the calculations occurring behind his composed expression. Sullivan's confirmation that Sonya Matthews was at Whispering Pines complicated matters considerably, though not in ways the younger man likely anticipated. Rising from his desk in the London penthouse's wood-panelled study, Morrison moved to the wall of windows overlooking the Thames. The river's dark surface reflected city lights like scattered diamonds, beautiful, valuable, yet ultimately artificial against the water's ancient power. An apt metaphor for his operations, perhaps, commerce and influence flowing beneath the surface of legitimate business, carrying valuable cargo through channels invisible to casual observation. At 62, James Morrison maintained a physical discipline that belied his age. Despite the late hour, he proceeded to his private gymnasium adjacent to the master suite, exchanging his tailored suit for exercise attire with methodical efficiency. The routine never varied, regardless of business demands. It was always 40 minutes to an hour of precisely calibrated exercise followed by carefully formulated protein supplementation. He began basic mobility movements with controlled breathing. Rhythmic movements mirrored the disciplined cadence of his thoughts as he processed the evening's developments. Gregory Constance's accident had been necessary, if unfortunate. The former inspector's meeting with Dieter Hoffmann represented an unacceptable escalation, threatening operations Morrison had spent decades constructing. The warning delivered should suffice to suppress further investigation. Constant had always prioritized his niece's safety above abstract justice. Sonya's presence at Whispering Pines, however, introduced variables less easily controlled. Sullivan's voice had betrayed subtle changes when discussing her, minute shifts in tone that suggested personal interest beyond strategic calculation, dangerous terrain, particularly given historical precedent. Moving to free weights, Morrison maintained perfect form through each repetition. Physical discipline reflected mental discipline, a philosophy that had served him well through war, peace, and the shadowy territories between. The weights grew heavier with each set, muscles protesting as he pushed precisely to optimal resistance without exceeding it. Knowing exact limitations prevented injury. Exceeding them invited catastrophe. Sullivan von Vogel showed troubling signs of forgetting this fundamental principle. His restoration of the Yorkshire lines proceeded with admirable efficiency, his business acumen proving worthy of the family name. Yet recent reports suggested concerning behaviors. The damaged window at Whispering Pines, incidents of talking to empty rooms, growing obsession with events nearly 3 decades past. The midnight shipment would test not merely his loyalty, but his stability under pressure. Completing his weightlifting circuit, Morrison moved to stretching exercises developed during his military service. Flexibility remained essential in both body and strategic planning. Tonight's developments required adjustment to existing timetables. Sullivan's usefulness might prove shorter-lived than initially projected. Such a shame. The boy possessed a genuine talent for operations, reminiscent of Sebastian before ambition had clouded his judgment. History suggested certain patterns repeated with remarkable fidelity across generations. The von Vogel tendency toward instability, the Matthews women's talent for uncovering precisely what should remain buried. The exercise complete, Morrison proceeded to his kitchen with the same measured pace that characterized all his movements. The protein drink, waited in the refrigerator, prepared each morning according to precise nutritional requirements, consumed at specific intervals to maintain optimal physical condition. No alcohol after 9, no refined sugar, no processed carbohydrates. The body was a machine requiring proper maintenance, particularly as decades accumulated. As he drank, Morrison reviewed the day's final mental checklist. Gregory neutralized, Helsinki shipment rerouted, Parliament committee delayed. Sullivan overseeing tonight's test cargo. The Eastern European expansion proceeded according to the blueprint. Morrison transports legitimate operations providing perfect cover for more lucrative enterprises flowing through the same channels. The ghosts of previous operations, literal and figurative, remained securely buried, except, perhaps, at Whispering Pines, where Sullivan increasingly reported phenomena Morrison found scientifically implausible yet operationally concerning. Sebastian von Vogel's death had been regrettable but necessary when his unpredictability threatened wider operations. History suggested similar measures might eventually prove required with his nephew, but not yet. Not while Sullivan retained utility and controllability. Morrison completed his evening ablutions with characteristic precision before retiring precisely at midnight. 6 hours of sleep, no more or less, maintained optimal cognitive function. As consciousness receded, his final thought centered not on Sullivan or Gregory, but on Sonya Matthews, so remarkably like her mother in appearance, yet fundamentally different in nature. Helena had fled from danger. Sonya moved toward it with almost reckless determination. His daughter, though she didn't know it, would never know it if operational security maintained priority over sentiment, which it must, as it always had. Sleep claimed him with the same efficiency with which he managed all biological functions. The alarm sounded at precisely 6 a.m. Morrison rose immediately, no transitional grogginess permitted. The morning proceeded according to established protocol, 30 minutes of calisthenics and flexibility exercises, followed by the day's first protein supplement and mineral additives. The shower lasted exactly 4 minutes. Water temperature adjusted to optimal stimulation of circulation, without excessive comfort that might encourage lingering. Shaving, dental hygiene, basic grooming, all executed with mechanical precision, developed over decades of refinement. Dressing followed specific sequence: undergarments, shirt, cotton in summer, sea island in winter, tie selected to project appropriate authority without ostentation, suit tailored to enhance natural presence while concealing the shoulder holster he'd carried since Mi-6 training in his youth. The Walther PPK contained 6 rounds, though Morrison had not fired it in anger since 1959 in Prague. Some tools remained essential despite infrequent use. Breakfast consisted of steel-cut oats, egg whites and black coffee. No sugar, no cream, nothing that might compromise the machine's optimal performance. Morrison consumed each bite with neither haste nor particular enjoyment, merely fulfilling biological requirements while reviewing the morning's intelligence briefings delivered by courier at 6:30 a.m. precisely. Gregory Constant remained hospitalized but stable. Surveillance confirmed no communication with external parties. His warning to Sonya had been incomplete, reducing immediate operational concerns. The weapons shipment had transferred successfully at Harrogate Junction. Sullivan performing his duties with expected efficiency. The cargo would reach Hamburg by evening, transferring to Russian buyers through established channels by week's end. Profitable and strategically valuable. Certain parties within British intelligence had expressed interest in tracking which specific Russian military units received these components. Morrison's 8 a.m. meeting with division heads proceeded with customary precision, each report delivered according to the established format, each decision rendered after appropriate consideration without unnecessary deliberation. Efficiency remained central to effective operation, whether of railways or international smuggling networks. The Yorkshire Line restoration has attracted favourable press coverage, Phillips noted during his presentation. Local authorities particularly appreciate the employment opportunities. Sullivan von Vogel has proven remarkably effective as a public representative. His performance at the Harrogate transfer was equally satisfactory, Morrison noted, sharing operational details only with his innermost circle. Though certain behavioral patterns warrant continued observation, the family history suggests caution, Barnes agreed, having worked with Morrison since the Dresden operation that had removed Sebastian. The von Vogels tend toward instability when pressure intensifies. Morrison nodded, acknowledging this assessment while revealing nothing of his deeper concerns. Leadership required selective transparency, sharing sufficient information for effective operation while maintaining necessary compartmentalization. Maintain established surveillance protocols, he instructed. Sullivan's utility currently outweighs potential liability, though that equation requires regular recalculation. The meeting concluded at 9:45 a.m., precisely as scheduled. Morrison's next appointment, a legitimate business negotiation with Norwegian shipping interests, would begin at 10:30, allowing exactly 45 minutes for correspondence and material review. Alone in his office, Morrison found his thoughts drifting unexpectedly to Sonya. Reports described her academic achievements, her independence, her determination, qualities he recognized from personal experience rather than mere observation. Helena's influence, certainly, but perhaps something of himself as well, though genetics remained a science of probabilities rather than certainties. The single photograph he permitted himself, Helena in New York, 1957, Sonya aged 7 beside her, remained locked in his desk rather than displayed. Sentiment represented potential vulnerability. Vulnerability invited exploitation. The discipline that had transformed James Morrison from MI6 field agent to international power broker permitted no such weaknesses. Yet, as he reviewed the Norwegian shipping proposals, Morrison found himself calculating Sonya's safety variables with unusual frequency. Sullivan's protection offered immediate security, yet introduced emotional complications potentially dangerous to all parties. The young von Vogel's behavior suggested growing instability, speaking to ghosts, violent outbursts, increasing fixation on Sonya rather than operational priorities. Perhaps intervention would prove necessary sooner rather than later. Morrison had maintained distance for 25 years, allowing Helena to raise their daughter free from the dangers his world presented. With Helena gone, and Sonya now directly involved, such separation no longer served protective functions. Morrison made a note to accelerate contingency planning regarding Sullivan von Vogel. The weapons shipment represented first phase testing, establishing the young man's operational value. The second phase assessment would evaluate psychological stability under increasing pressure. Should deficiencies emerge, alternative arrangements would become necessary. Sonya Matthews would require extraction from Whispering Pines before Sullivan's inevitable removal. Her safety remained non-negotiable, regardless of operational requirements or her own choices. Morrison had failed Helena once, allowing duty to override personal considerations. He would not repeat that particular miscalculation with their daughter. For now, however, immediate operations require attention. The Norwegian shipping agreement, the Berlin corridor negotiations, and the Helsinki rerouting all demanded the focused intellect and strategic vision that had built Morrison Transport from post-war opportunities into a continental power. Morrison straightened his tie, checked his watch, and adopted the expression of benign authority that had served him through countless negotiations. Personal concerns, Sullivan's stability, Sonya's safety, Gregory's persistence, would be addressed at the appropriate time through established protocols with the same precision that governed all aspects of his existence. The Morrison Empire had not been built through impulsive action or emotional indulgence. Strategic patience had transformed a junior MI6 transportation liaison into Europe's shadow logistics master. That same patience would resolve current complications while preserving essential operations. All pieces on the board remained in play, moving according to their nature. Morrison needed to ensure his position allowed him to observe all movements, anticipate all contingencies, and maintain control of the game's inevitable conclusion. He was, after all, the architect of this reality, not merely a participant within it. The Norwegian shipping negotiation concluded precisely on schedule, with contracts signed, hands shaken, and future profits secured through carefully worded clauses that appeared standard while concealing deeper advantages. Morrison had built his empire through such details, phrases overlooked by conventional businessmen, but revelatory to those who understood the architecture of power beneath commercial transactions. His next meeting required a different venue, not Morrison Transport's corporate headquarters, but a private dining room at the Travelers Club, where certain conversations occurred beyond official records. The room had been swept for surveillance devices that morning, though Morrison harbored no illusions about complete privacy. In a world of competing intelligence services, true secrecy existed only in silence, which business unfortunately rendered impossible. He arrived 5 minutes early, as was his custom, sufficient time to assess the space, confirm security protocols, establish psychological advantage. Through territory claimed before others entered, the mahogany table gleamed beneath century-old chandeliers, white linen, and sterling silver arranged with military precision that would satisfy even his exacting standards. The first arrival, precisely on time, was Admiral Whitehall, Naval Intelligence's unofficial liaison to commercial shipping interests. Officially retired in 1958, the Admiral now coordinated maritime surveillance operations that never appeared in government budgets. Morrison, he acknowledged with professional courtesy, accepting the offered handshake. "Productive morning, I trust?" "Invariably," Morrison replied, gesturing to the chair at his right, a position suggesting respect without conceding authority. The Norwegian arrangement should prove beneficial to multiple interests. They spoke of inconsequential matters until the others arrived in swift succession. Colonel Barrett from Military Intelligence, his civilian attire concealing recent operations in Berlin. Undersecretary Harrington from the Foreign Office, whose benign appearance belied his control of black budget operations across Eastern Europe. And finally, Sir William Edwards, whose government position carried no official title but whose authority extended into territories others preferred not to acknowledge. Lunch was served with practiced efficiency. The meal itself was irrelevant beyond its function as pretext for the gathering. These men did not meet for social purposes or gastronomic enjoyment. The food, like the oak-paneled room, the attentive service, the vintage wine, merely provided cover for exchanges that officially never occurred. "Your Hamburg corridor operations have attracted attention at certain levels," Sir William observed once the waitstaff had withdrawn, his tone conveying neither approval nor condemnation, particularly given recent Soviet naval movements in the Baltic. "Transportation infrastructure functions regardless of political climate," Morrison replied, cutting his lamb with surgical precision. Morrison, "Transport maintains appropriate documentation for all commercial shipments." Colonel Barrett smiled thinly, "Including last night's specialized agricultural equipment bound for Russian collective farms. Most impressive harvest machinery, according to manifests our sources obtained." Morrison met his gaze without hesitation. "Market opportunities exist throughout Europe, Colonel. British export policies, unfortunately, limit certain commercial engagements that our competitors pursue without similar constraint. Helicopter targeting systems aren't generally classified as agricultural equipment," Barrett countered, though without heat. The observation carried professional assessment rather than moral judgment. "Classification discrepancies occasionally arise through translation errors," Morrison offered smoothly. "International commerce often suffers from terminological inconsistencies." Admiral Whitehall leaned forward slightly. "What interests us, James, is not the semantic categorization, but the operational intelligence such shipments might provide." And there it was, the true purpose behind this gathering of men who considered themselves, despite occasional methodological flexibility, the guardians of British interests against communist expansion. Morrison had anticipated this approach. Indeed, he had carefully cultivated it over decades of strategic positioning. "I imagine certain tracking devices might have been incorporated into specialized components," Morrison acknowledged, conceding nothing not already known. "Hypothetically speaking, of course." "Of course," Sir William agreed, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Hypothetically, such intelligence regarding Soviet helicopter deployment would prove valuable to multiple departments, particularly concerning the Kamov Kar-25 units recently stationed near Kaliningrad," added Barrett. "Their operational range suggests concerning capabilities regarding NATO shipping movements." Morrison nodded, taking a calculated sip of wine before responding. "Transportation networks function most efficiently when information flows parallel to physical cargo." Morrison Transport has always recognized the symbiotic relationship between commercial viability and broader strategic interests. A businessman and a patriot, observed Harrington, speaking for the first time. Though one wonders how these philosophical positions reconcile with certain shipments eastward. The modern world requires nuanced navigation, Morrison replied, meeting each man's gaze in turn. Soviet military technology develops regardless of Western restriction efforts. Selective, controlled exposure to specific components allows valuable tracking opportunities while maintaining plausible commercial engagement. And substantial profit, added Barrett, though without accusation. Commerce without profit is charity, Morrison acknowledged. A noble endeavor but unsustainable as an operational model. The conversation shifted to specifics. What intelligence might reasonably be expected from the tracking devices embedded within the agricultural equipment? What timeline for data retrieval? What limitations regarding transmission security? Morrison provided precisely calibrated information, sufficient to maintain his value to these men without revealing the multiple layers of his actual operations. These officials, who indeed considered themselves the good guys despite occasional moral flexibility, represented merely one faction within Morrison's complex network of alliances. The Russians received their helicopter components with embedded tracking devices, knowing full well they were there but accepting the compromise to acquire needed technology. British intelligence received valuable data on Soviet military deployments. Morrison Transport received payment from all parties while maintaining a position as an essential intermediary. The Yorkshire Line restoration progresses well? Sir William inquired as their meeting concluded, the question carrying layers of meaning beyond the simple words. Quite satisfactorily, Morrison confirmed. The von Vogel heir shows considerable aptitude for the family business. Sebastian's nephew, Whitehall remarked, studying his cognac with apparent casualness. One hopes he maintains better operational security than his uncle managed in '43. The reference to Sebastian's death, officially an unfortunate accident, unofficially something considerably more calculated, hung briefly between them. These men had been younger then, some still in field positions rather than behind administrative desks, but all understood the unspoken history. Sullivan benefits from improved guidance, Morrison replied, the modest understatement serving its purpose. Though family traits occasionally manifest in concerning patterns, keep us informed of any significant developments, Sir William said, rising to signal the meeting's conclusion, particularly regarding the Baltic tracking data and the von Vogel restoration project. Naturally, Morrison agreed, accepting handshakes as they departed one by one, each exit timed to prevent observable patterns to casual observers. Alone once more, Morrison permitted himself a moment of private assessment. These men viewed the world through the binary lens of Western democracy versus Soviet expansion, a perspective both accurate and profoundly limited. They considered themselves righteous pragmatists, willing to employ occasional moral flexibility in service to greater principles. Morrison harbored no such illusions about his operations. He served neither East nor West, but the perpetual Third Kingdom of power itself, the shadow networks of influence that survived all political ideologies, all governmental changes, and all historical transitions. Democracy, communism, and fascism all required transportation, all generated profit, all created opportunity for those positioned at crucial intersections. He had learned this fundamental truth during Operation Crossroads, watching intelligence officers from opposing sides employ identical methods while claiming moral distinction. Sebastian von Vogel had understood this reality too, though he had lacked the discipline to navigate its complexities without self-destruction. Sullivan showed signs of similar insight, coupled with similar instability, a concerning combination that required close monitoring and potential intervention. Morrison checked his watch. His next appointment would begin in 20 minutes, sufficient time to return to his office and review essential documentation. The meeting with British officials had proceeded according to the expected parameters, maintaining his position as a valuable asset without compromising operational autonomy. The von Vogel railway restoration, Sullivan's mental state, Sonya's safety, Gregory's investigation, all would require attention in appropriate sequence. For now, the intelligence officials departed satisfied with their arrangement, believing themselves the primary beneficiaries of Morrison's operations, while remaining unaware of identical conversations he conducted with their Soviet counterparts. The true art lay not in serving multiple masters, but in ensuring each believed themselves the primary beneficiary of one's service. The officials who had just left considered Morrison a valuable, if occasionally morally flexible, asset to Western interests. Their counterparts in Moscow maintained similar beliefs regarding Russian priorities. Neither fully comprehended the extent to which Morrison transport served primarily its perpetuation, its expansion, its vision of power transcending temporary political realities. As Morrison settled his account and prepared to depart, he reflected that this fundamental misunderstanding had protected his operations for decades. These officials and their counterparts across ideological divides believed themselves to be using Morrison for their purposes, while precisely the opposite remained true. The most effective power never announced itself as such. It simply positioned itself at essential intersections through which all other ambitions must eventually travel. Morrison straightened his tie, checked his watch, and proceeded toward his next appointment. Another conversation with another faction that considered itself the primary beneficiary of his talents. The game continued, each piece moving according to its nature, while the true architect remained comfortably invisible behind legitimate business. Operations and carefully cultivated relationships with powerful men who believed themselves to be the actual players, rather than the pieces they truly were,